right, everyone, get ready, because today we're taking a deep dive into the world of money laundering.
Ooh, exciting.
We'll be looking at how it works, why people do it, and some of those clever but definitely illegal tactics that are used.
Right.
Now, you're probably thinking, hey, I'm not laundering any fortunes anytime soon.
Yeah.
But even if you're not planning on, going down that route,
Right.
understanding this whole world, this kind of shadowy world of money laundering can be really fascinating.
Absolutely.
And maybe even, you might be able to spot some red flags in your own financial dealings. You never know.
Yeah, you never know.
So for this deep dive, we're actually basing it on a really informative YouTube video.
Okay.
That does a great job of breaking down the process of money laundering in a way that's easy to understand, even if you don't have, a background in finance or anything like that.
That's great.
So let's say, hypothetically, of
Of
course,
course,
you come across a huge pile of cash.
Right.
Maybe you win the lottery. Maybe you get an inheritance from some long-lost relative. And you might think, okay, time to live the high life.
Right.
But it's not quite that simple, is it?
Well, not really. I mean, there's a reason why people with a lot of ill-gotten gains, let's say, go through all the trouble of actually laundering that money. It's not just about hiding it from the tax man,
Right.
It's about making it usable, making it blend in.
Yeah, it's almost like trying to fit a square peg into a round hole.
Exactly.
You got to kind of like reshape that money to make it fit into the legitimate world.
Exactly, yeah.
So when we're talking about why someone would go through all this effort to launder money, there are three main reasons.
Okay.
Security, global access, and avoiding scrutiny.
Right.
So let's start with security.
Okay.
Obviously, hiding millions of dollars in your mattress isn't the best idea.
Not the best, no.
And not just because of, the risk of burglars or anything like that.
Right.
But think about like fire, floods, or even just like wear and tear on the money itself.
Yeah.
And just the impracticality of having to move around large amounts of physical cash.
Exactly.
The practicality definitely comes into play.
Yeah.
And then there's global access.
Right.
What's that all about?
Well, let's say you want to buy a villa in Italy, or maybe invest in a tech startup in Singapore. You can't really just show up with a suitcase full of cash.
Right.
You need a way to move that money quickly and easily, internationally, and seamlessly.
So that's where the global financial system comes in.
Exactly.
But if you start moving around large sums of money without a clear, legitimate source, red flags start going up.
Oh, yeah.
Like at banks, with authorities.
Yeah.
And then you're in trouble.
Definitely, yeah.
So that brings us to the whole avoiding scrutiny aspect. It's not just about hiding the money. It's about coming up with a believable story of how you got it in the first place.
Exactly, yeah.
Like creating an illusion of legitimacy.
That's it, yeah, making that dirty money look clean.
So how do they actually do that? How do they actually launder the money?
Well, there's a three-step process.
Okay.
Usually it involves three phases.
Okay.
Placement, layering, and integration.
Okay, break those down for me.
Okay, so placement is the first step, and it's actually the riskiest one.
Oh, really?
Yeah, because it's about getting that dirty money into the financial system, but without setting off any alarms.
I imagine walking into a bank with a duffel bag full of cash isn't the way to do it.
No, definitely not, unless you want to go straight to jail.
Right.
You got to be a bit more subtle.
Okay.
So one tactic that's often used is using cash-intensive businesses.
Like what?
Like think restaurants, bars, laundromats, those kinds of things.
Right, because they're dealing with a lot of cash already.
Exactly, yeah. They handle a lot of cash on a daily basis.
Yeah.
So it's easier to slip in some extra bills without raising too much suspicion.
Right, like hiding in plain sight.
Yeah, exactly. It's like hiding a tree in a forest.
So it gets a bit of a wash during this placement phase, but it's not sparkling clean yet, right?
Right, it's not completely clean yet.
So that takes us to layering.
Yes, exactly.
What's happening in the layering stage?
So layering is all about making that money trail as tangled and confusing as possible.
Okay.
Imagine moving money through all these different shell companies.
Shell companies?
Yeah. Basically, think of them like empty corporate shells.
Oh, okay.
They exist on paper, but they don't really have any operations.
Interesting.
And they're often based in different countries.
Okay.
With like strict banking secrecy laws.
So they're bouncing the money around between these companies, making it impossible to follow.
Exactly. It's like a big puzzle where all the pieces are the same color.
Right. Good luck figuring that out.
Exactly.
But eventually they want to use that money. They can't keep it hidden forever.
Right. They can't just keep it tucked away.
So how do they get it back into the legitimate world?
That brings us to the final stage, integration.
Okay, so this is where that money finally sees the light of day.
Yes, legally.
Legally, of course.
Integration is about bringing that laundered money back into the economy. So it looks like it was earned, honestly.
So how do they actually integrate it?
Well, think investments in legitimate businesses, real estate, art collections.
Oh, okay.
Anything that gives the money an air of respectability.
Right, suddenly that fancy yacht doesn't look so suspicious anymore.
Exactly. It just looks like the fruits of their success.
Like they earned it, honestly.
Right. And because the money's been cleaned so thoroughly through layering, it's really difficult to connect it back to its original source.
Wow, it's a pretty elaborate system.
It is, yeah.
So we've talked about the why of money laundering and those 3 stages, but I'm guessing there are like specific tactics within those stages.
Oh, absolutely.
What are some of those tools of the trade?
Well, one classic tactic, as we touched on before, is using cash-intensive businesses.
Okay.
So picture this. A small town laundromat,
Okay.
packed with customers.
Okay.
The business itself might be totally legit, but the owner could be inflating their daily cash intake.
Oh, I see.
To blend in some illegal funds.
So on paper, it looks like the laundromat's doing great,
Exactly.
but they're just using it to clean money.
Exactly.
It's a low-tech method, but effective if done carefully.
Yeah, but if they get too greedy and report ridiculous profits,
Right.
they'll raise some eyebrows.
That's true. Can't be too obvious.
Definitely not.
So what's another tactic?
Another common one is called smurfing.
Smurfing.
Yeah, and basically it involves breaking down large sums of cash into smaller deposits, often below the reporting threshold that banks have to flag.
So instead of depositing like $50,000 all at once,
Right.
they have people deposit like $9,000 each at different branches.
Exactly, trying to slip under the radar. But with the software banks are using these days, those suspicious patterns are getting easier to spot.
So not as foolproof as it used to be.
Not at all.
And then, for the more adventurous type, there's always cash smuggling.
Yes.
This is where they physically move the money across borders.
Right, often using some creative hiding places.
Like hollowed out books or secret compartments in cars.
Exactly. It's risky, but the reward can be high.
High risk, high reward.
If they don't get caught.
And I'm guessing getting caught with a car full of cash is a bit more than a slap on the wrist.
Yeah, we're talking serious legal trouble, asset forfeiture, maybe even jail time.
So we've got cash-intensive businesses, we've got smurfing, we've got cash smuggling.
Right.
Those are pretty creative ways to move money around.
They are, yeah.
But what about, like, larger sums of money? How do they launder those?
Well, for the bigger amounts, they often use bank transfers and shell companies.
Okay.
The goal here is to move money through this complex web of accounts. So it's almost impossible to trace where it came from.
So they might set up a shell company in a country with lax banking regulations.
Right.
Transfer the money there, then bounce it through a few more accounts before bringing it back to a safe location.
Exactly. Yeah, like creating a financial labyrinth.
Sounds like something out of a spy novel.
It kind of is, haha.
And then, of course, there's the classic casino scheme.
Oh, yeah, the casino caper.
You walk in with a suitcase full of cash, buy chips, gamble a bit, win or lose, then cash out.
Right.
Clean money.
It sounds good in theory, but casinos these days are under tight regulations.
Okay.
Any large cash transactions are going to get scrutinized very carefully.
So no more walking up to the roulette table with a duffel bag full of cash.
No, haha, not unless you want to be on every casino's watch list.
Right, so they might try to use that smurfing technique we talked about.
Exactly. Yeah, breaking down those big transactions into smaller, less noticeable ones.
Interesting. It seems like a lot of these tactics are about breaking down those large, suspicious transactions into smaller, more mundane ones.
That's a good observation. Yeah, it's all about blending in.
Right. Making it look as normal as possible.
Exactly.
So what else do these money launderers have up their sleeve?
Well, prepaid cards have become popular for laundering smaller amounts.
Okay.
They're easy to get, don't always require a lot of ID checks, and you can use them for all sorts of transactions.
So load them up with dirty money and use them for everyday purchases.
Yeah, but of course there are limits. They're not meant for moving huge sums of money around.
Okay, so not ideal for the millions, but for cleaning a few $1,000s.
Right. For smaller scale operations, they can be appealing.
Okay, interesting.
Now, let's step things up a bit.
All right.
Let's talk about private ATMs.
Private ATMs.
Yeah, imagine you get a few private ATMs.
Okay.
Place them strategically in high-traffic areas.
Like convenience stores or bars.
Exactly, and you load them with your dirty money.
Interesting.
So when customers make withdrawals, it looks like a normal transaction.
Oh, I see. So it gets mixed in with the ATM's regular cash flow.
Right, it's a clever way to wash the money.
But wouldn't it be suspicious to have all this extra cash in your account?
Well, that's where a convincing front company comes in.
Ah, right. Makes sense.
It's all about that facade of legitimacy.
Right. Got to make it look legit.
Exactly.
These tactics are getting more and more elaborate.
They are. It's like a financial chess game.
So are there any methods that take it to a whole other level?
Oh, absolutely.
Okay, tell me more.
We've got to talk about trade-based money laundering.
Right.
This is often used by sophisticated criminal organizations.
Okay.
And it involves manipulating the prices of goods in international trade to move money.
Okay, that sounds complicated.
They can be, yeah.
Explain it like I'm 5.
All right, so you got a big pile of illegal cash in one country.
Okay.
And you need to get it to another without raising suspicion.
Mm-hmm.
So you work with a bunch of businesses to manipulate import and export prices.
Oh, I see.
You're essentially hiding the money within those transactions.
So it's like using legitimate trade as a cover.
Exactly. And because it involves multiple companies and countries, it can be super hard to unravel.
Wow, next level stuff.
It is, yeah.
And then there's over and under invoicing. What's the difference between that and the trade-based laundering we just talked about?
So they both use international trade to move money, but over and under invoicing is about manipulating the value of goods.
Okay.
So let's say you're exporting cars to another country.
Okay.
You could falsify the invoices, either inflate or deflate the value to move money without actually moving cash.
Interesting. So it blends in with legitimate business activity?
Precisely.
Wow. So we've covered cash-intensive businesses, smurfing, cash smuggling, bank transfers, shell companies, casinos, prepaid cards, private ATMs, trade-based laundering, over and under invoicing.
Yeah, quite a list.
Anything else they use?
One more we should talk about. It's maybe the oldest trick in the book, but still intriguing. Underground banking.
Underground banking.
Yeah, also known as hawala.
Hawala, that sounds mysterious.
It is. It's a system that relies on brokers.
Okay.
And it's often used in areas with limited access to traditional banking.
So it's like a parallel financial system.
Exactly. And it's all based on trust.
Trust.
Yeah, and reputation.
So how does it work?
So let's say you want to send money to a relative in another country.
Okay.
You contact a hawala broker, give them the cash, and get a code.
Okay.
The broker then contacts their counterpart in the other country and tells them to pay the equivalent amount to your relative.
And they do that just based on the code?
Yeah, it's all about trust and a complex network of debts and credits.
Wow, like a global system of IOUs.
Basically, yeah.
But wouldn't that be really vulnerable to fraud?
You'd think so, but it's thrived for centuries because of those strong bonds and reputation within the network.
So high trust, low tech.
Exactly.
But I'm guessing it's not exactly legal everywhere.
No, it's illegal in many countries because it's not very transparent.
Right. I can see how that would be a concern.
Yeah, definitely.
It's a fascinating system, though.
It is.
So we've talked a lot about the how of money laundering. But I think it's just as important to understand the why.
Absolutely.
Like what motivates people to do this?
Yeah, what drives them to engage in such risky behavior?
It's a good question. And I think it deserves its own deep dive.
I agree.
It's a reminder that the world of finance, with all its complexities, is ultimately driven by human desires and motivations.
It is, yeah.
And those motivations can be pretty complex. It's not always just about greed.
Right.
Sometimes it's about survival. Sometimes it's about power. Sometimes it's about protecting yourself or your family.
Yeah. There are all sorts of human stories behind these activities.
It's a good reminder that we can't just focus on the mechanics of these schemes.
Right.
We need to understand the people involved.
Absolutely.
And their motivations.
Yeah. And that's what makes it so interesting.
Well, this has been a really insightful conversation so far.
Yeah, it has.
I'm starting to see the world of money laundering in a whole new light. But before we wrap up this part of our deep dive, I want to leave our listeners with something to think about.
Okay.
We've talked about these grand schemes, international transfers, complex webs of transactions.
Right.
But what about the more subtle forms of money laundering?
Interesting.
How might these tactics be present in our everyday lives, even if we don't realize it?
Yeah, good question.
And how might these methods be adapted for other illegal activities beyond just cleaning money?
Interesting question.
It's something to ponder.
Yeah, definitely.
We'll delve into those questions and more in the next part of our deep dive.
Looking forward to it.
So stay tuned.
I will. It's true. Money laundering can seem like this far-off thing.
Right.
This abstract concept. But when you start thinking about it in everyday life, it's like, wow, it could be happening right here.
Yeah, it's like, oh, that dry cleaner down the street.
Exactly.
Could be laundering money. You never know.
You never know, right? And we think of money laundering as these big criminal organizations.
Yeah, like in the movies.
Right, but even smaller operations can use these techniques.
So what are some of those businesses we should be looking out for?
Well, think about businesses that deal mostly in cash, like flea markets,
Oh, sure.
used car dealerships, certain service providers, things like that.
Yeah, places where there's already a lot of cash flowing around.
Exactly. It's easier to blend in the illegal funds that way.
Right. It makes sense.
And the more we understand these tactics, the better we can spot those red flags.
It's like developing a more critical eye for those financial activities.
Yeah, you got to trust your gut, like if something feels off.
Yeah, what are some of those telltale signs that something's fishy?
Well, one thing is businesses that seem to be doing really well, but they don't have many customers, or their business model doesn't make sense.
Like that antique shop that's always going out of business but never actually does.
Exactly, haha. Or that restaurant that's always empty but suddenly making huge profits.
Yeah, those inconsistencies.
Yeah, something doesn't add up.
It's about trusting your gut.
Absolutely.
And if you notice something, report it.
Yes, definitely. Better safe than sorry.
We all have a part to play in stopping this.
Absolutely.
So you mentioned earlier that these money laundering tactics could be used for other illegal activities.
Right.
Not just cleaning dirty money.
It's true. The same principles apply to other crimes.
Like what?
Well, think about human trafficking, drug smuggling, arms dealing.
Oh, wow.
Anything that generates a lot of illegal cash needs a way to clean it.
So those techniques we talked about, the shell companies, the smurfing, they could be used for all sorts of things.
Exactly. It's about disguising the origin of the funds, making the trail hard to follow.
Making it look legit.
Right, making it look like the money was earned legally.
It's kind of scary to think about.
It is, yeah. It highlights how interconnected the criminal world is.
And how important it is for law enforcement to keep up.
Absolutely. They're constantly adapting to stay one step ahead.
It's a never-ending game.
It really is.
So we've talked about the how, but what about the who? Who are the people involved in money laundering?
It's a wider range than you might think.
Okay.
Of course, you have your organized crime.
Right.
But it could be anyone trying to hide illegal funds.
Like?
Corrupt officials, white-collar criminals, terrorists.
Wow, really?
Even everyday people who are involved in smaller schemes.
So what about technology? Has that made money laundering easier or harder?
That's a great question, and it's a tough one.
Yeah.
Technology is a double-edged sword,
Okay.
On one hand, it makes it easier to move money quickly and anonymously.
Right, harder to track.
Yeah, but on the other hand, it gives law enforcement new tools.
To catch it.
Exactly. They can analyze transactions, spot suspicious patterns.
Because it's an arms race.
It is, yeah, digital arms race.
So it's more important than ever to stay informed.
Absolutely. The methods and technologies are always changing.
So going back to what we talked about earlier about money laundering in everyday life, what can people do to protect themselves?
Well, the first thing is just be aware of the tactics.
Right, like having a mental checklist of red flags.
Exactly, and be careful who you do business with.
Yeah, if something feels off, trust your gut.
Exactly, like those too good to be true investments.
Right, or that website selling designer bags for like $10.
Exactly, always do your research.
And if you suspect something, report it.
Yes, definitely. Don't hesitate to contact the authorities.
That's a good point. We all have a role to play.
We do. It's about protecting our communities.
It can feel overwhelming, all this talk about money laundering.
It can, yeah.
But the goal isn't to make everyone an expert.
Right.
It's about raising awareness.
Yeah, getting people to think about it.
So they can be more informed citizens.
Exactly, and that's a good place to start.
We spent a lot of time talking about how money laundering works, but I'm kind of curious what happens when these schemes fall apart.
Yeah, what are the consequences?
Yeah, like what happens to the people who get caught?
Well, it depends on how big the operation was, but we're talking big fines.
Okay.
Asset forfeiture and possibly some serious jail time.
That's a pretty big risk.
It is.
You'd think that would be enough to deter people,
You would think so.
but some people are just drawn to that quick money.
Yeah, they think they can beat the system.
Like it's a gamble. They think they can win.
It is a gamble, but the odds are definitely not in their favor.
So how do law enforcement agencies even keep up with all of this?
It's a tough job for sure.
Yeah.
It's like a constant cat and mouse game.
Right.
But one of the biggest things is international cooperation.
Makes sense because money laundering crosses borders all the time.
Exactly. So agencies from different countries have to work together.
To share information and coordinate investigations.
Right, and they're also working to harmonize regulations.
So there aren't any loopholes for criminals to exploit.
That's the idea.
Smart.
And data analysis is also becoming really important.
Okay.
With so much financial data out there, agencies are using software to look for suspicious patterns.
Like finding a needle in a haystack.
Yeah, but with technology, they can do it.
That's pretty amazing.
It is.
And you also mentioned financial intelligence units before.
Oh, yeah, the FIUs.
What do they do exactly?
They're like the detectives of the financial world.
Okay.
They collect and analyze data to find out who's doing what.
Wow, so it's a whole team effort to combat money laundering.
It is a huge effort.
But it's a fight that never really ends, does it?
Unfortunately, no. As long as there are people trying to make a quick buck illegally,
Right.
money laundering will continue to be a problem.
But hopefully with all these efforts, it'll become harder and harder.
That's the goal.
So as we wrap up our deep dive, I want to leave our listeners with one final thought.
Okay.
We've talked about all the ins and outs of money laundering,
The tactics,
the motivations,
consequences. But it's important to remember that this isn't just some abstract concept.
Right. It affects all of us,
In one way or another.
whether we realize it or not.
So what can we do about it?
Well, first of all, we can be more informed.
Okay.
Learn about the methods, the red flags, the ways to report suspicious activity.
Knowledge is power.
Absolutely. And we can be more engaged citizens.
What do you mean?
We can demand transparency from our leaders and our financial institutions.
Okay.
And support policies that make it harder for criminals to launder money.
We can all do our part.
Exactly. It's a collective responsibility.
This has been a really eye-opening deep dive.
It's been fascinating.
We've explored the dark side of finance,
Yeah.
exposed the secrets of money laundering,
And looked at the human side of it all.
and I hope we've empowered our listeners to be more informed and vigilant. I hope so too.
Remember, knowledge is power and awareness is the first step.
To a fairer and more just financial system.
Thank you for joining us on this journey.
It's been a pleasure.
We'll be back next time with another deep dive into a topic that's shaping our world.
See you then.
Until then, stay curious, keep exploring, and remember, we all have a role to play in making the world a better place.